She wasn't meant to look twice at a man like him. Born to firelight, feathers, and the bloodline of chiefs, she carried the silence of ancient songs in her eyes and the expectation of her people on her back. He, on the other hand, was calloused from sunburned labor, the son of a forgotten settler in a drought-stricken field. No saddle, no status, just dirt beneath his nails and a heart that beat too loud when she passed. And yet, one night beneath the moon, she kissed him, not out of rebellion, but out of truth. The valley held its breath. Her tribe, carved from centuries of strength and survival, watched from the shadows. Warriors whispered. Elders frowned. Some said it was a disgrace. Others said it was a test. But she said nothing, not even to him. She simply took his hand, held it between both of hers, and waited for the wind to speak. What followed was not a scandal. It was a story the earth would never let die. Because that kiss wasn't just affection, it was recognition. She saw in him something the others couldn't, a kind of quiet courage, the kind that doesn't rise in war but wakes in storms. And by dawn, when the sun rose like fire behind the ridge, she would prove that what she felt wasn't a moment of foolishness. It was a legacy beginning, one not born of bloodline, but of choice. Before the sun touched the mountaintop, she would make the entire tribe feel something they hadn't felt in years, the shaking power of honor rising from the most unexpected place. Not with blades, not with titles, but with an act so brave, it would echo through every tent, every heart, and every trail beyond. Because sometimes, in the Old West, the strongest warrior didn't ride a horse or raise a spear. Sometimes, she just chose to love someone the world called unworthy. When the first light cracked the sky, the whispers hadn't faded. Around the tribe's fires, elders still murmured with tightened jaws, and warriors glanced at one another with uncertainty, cloaked in pride. No one knew what to do with what they'd seen. A princess, sacred to the bloodline of the Black Elk, pressing her lips to the cheek of a man who owned no horse, no spear, no heritage. The poor farmer had simply stood there, too stunned to understand what he had received. And yet, she had looked at him like the earth itself had placed him in her path. Her name was Ayasha, meaning little one, though there was nothing small about her. She had been trained in healing, diplomacy, and defense since she could walk. Her father, Chief Makwa, was known for his wisdom, and it was said he carried the sky in his silence. Ayasha was the jewel of their people, not just for her beauty, but because she could calm rage with a glance and read danger in the wind. She was expected to marry a warrior, perhaps even one from another tribe, to seal alliances. But she had kissed a farmer. His name was Eli, and he had never been kissed before. He lived beyond the ridge, where the soil was red and dry, but still he tried each day to grow beans, maize, and hope. Most days he failed. He had no family left, only a mule and a cabin made from warped timber. But he never stole, never begged. He always greeted those who passed with a hat over his heart and dirt on his face. The tribe had traded with him for years, quietly, cautiously, but no one had ever welcomed him. Until her. And that morning, after the kiss, Eli hadn't run. He didn't hide. He returned to his field and began to work like nothing had changed. But everything had. Ayasha watched from the hilltop. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from something far more dangerous in her world, conviction. She had felt something in that man, a fire not loud, but steady, and she knew the storm was coming. But she also knew the fire inside him was stronger than any blade or people might raise. By midday, the drums sounded, not the ceremonial kind, but the ones that summoned judgment. A gathering was called in the main circle. Elders took their places, wrapped in wolf hides and silence. Chief Makwa stood with his staff, its feathers motionless in the wind. The tribe came forward slowly, one by one, some with anger, others with confusion. Ayasha walked alone into the center, head high, eyes still. She didn't flinch when the questions began. Why shame the bloodline? One elder asked. Why waste your power on a man of no name? Another said. But she didn't answer with defense. She answered with memory. She spoke of the night she twisted her ankle near the edge of the canyon and how Eli found her there, carrying her back without asking who she was. She told them how, when warriors mocked him in the market, he never retaliated, only smiled. She reminded them that strength is not just shown in war, but in the way a man endures without bitterness. Chief Makwa listened, his face unreadable. His silence was the silence that made men tremble. And when Ayasha finished, he raised his hand. "Bring the man," he said. There was no delay. Riders were sent to the ridge. Eli didn't resist. He came on foot, without weapons, eyes steady even as the tribe parted like tall grass around him. He walked to the center and stood beside Ayasha, shorter than her, humbler in presence, but rooted like a tree that refused to sway. Makwa looked at him for a long while. Then he asked a single question. "Do you love her?" Eli swallowed, looked to Ayasha, and answered, "I don't know if I deserve to, but I would protect her with everything I have, even if all I have is a broken field and borrowed boots." The circle was silent. Even the wind seemed to listen. And then Ayasha stepped forward, reached into the pouch at her side, and dropped something at her father's feet. A small stone, wrapped in sinew and painted red. A symbol. A challenge. It was not just a declaration of love. It was an invitation. By tradition, it meant this. If Eli could pass the ancient test of earth and spirit, no man, chief or not, could forbid her choice. The crowd gasped. One elder whispered, "She invoked the old rite." The storm had arrived, and there would be no turning back. The old rite was not spoken of lightly. It predated the tribe's written memory, etched instead into the stories told beneath firelight, when even the bravest warriors fell quiet. Only a handful had attempted it in the past century, and fewer still had returned unchanged. It was a trial of spirit, not muscle, a journey through the sacred canyon known as Nato, the Whispering Path. Those who entered had to face the truth the land saw in them, and the land never lied. Eli didn't flinch when the rite was explained. He listened with the stillness of a man who had learned that waiting was sometimes louder than speaking. Ayasha did not beg him to reconsider. She only placed her hand on his chest and said, "The land remembers kindness. Let's see yours." That evening, with nothing but a pouch of water, a knife, and the clothes he wore, Eli walked barefoot toward the canyon while the entire tribe watched in silence. No cheering, no protest, just the wind carrying his name into the dark. The canyon greeted him not with awe, but with absence. The air grew thick. The walls seemed to pulse with memory. He walked until the light behind him vanished, and the path became a river of stone. That's when it began. The voices, not spoken aloud, but echoing inside his chest. His mother's regret, his father's silence, the failure of crops, the sting of hunger, the shame of being invisible. The canyon didn't test his body. It tested his worth. He fell once. Then again. His palms bled. His throat dried. At one point, he curled beneath a rock, trembling from a cold that came not from temperature, but from doubt. And yet, he stayed. He whispered names, prayers, gratitudes, not for escape, but for the life he had lived, however small. "If I die here," he whispered, "let the earth at least know I came with nothing but truth." And then it happened. A warm wind, a single ray of light through the canyon wall. It struck the necklace Ayasha had hidden in his pocket before he left. The turquoise caught the light, and in that glow, the voices fell silent. The canyon no longer threatened. It accepted. When Eli emerged 2 days later, sunburnt, starved, but standing tall, the tribe fell into a hush deeper than before. No one needed to ask. The land had spoken. Tradition demanded that a returning soul be welcomed by the drummers. But that morning, the drums were not beaten with power. They were played with reverence. Slow, hollow, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Eli approached the circle on his own, eyes sunken but bright, each step weighted by experience not all could see. Ayasha met him at the edge, but said nothing. She waited for her people to feel what she already knew. Chief Makwa stepped forward. His staff struck the ground once, twice, then paused. "The land has measured you," he said, "and it has not rejected you." He turned to his people. "Then why should we?" A murmur rolled through the crowd, soft, stunned, awakening. No applause, just acknowledgement. For the first time, Eli was not standing among them. He was standing with them. Later that evening, Ayasha prepared the ceremonial garment herself, simple, hand-stitched, lined with the feathers of the blue jay, a symbol of resilience and clarity. She dressed Eli not as a prince, but as one of her choosing, not chosen by rank, not chosen by force, chosen by spirit. As they walked together through the sacred grove, young girls laid petals at their feet, and even the skeptics lowered their gaze, not in shame, but in silent apology. That night, around the fire, elders asked Eli to speak, not to explain, but to share. He stood, unsure at first, then found the ground with his toes, the flame with his eyes. "I don't know the songs," he began, "and I don't have stories from great warriors. But I've watched the wind carry seeds farther than birds fly. I've seen flowers grow in soil everyone gave up on. And I've loved a woman whose heart could have looked anywhere, but it looked back at me." The fire cracked. The stars blinked. And in that moment, the tribe saw what Ayesha had always seen. Not a poor man, not a stranger, but a root that had finally found its earth. The days that followed unfolded like quiet thunder, soft on the surface, but echoing deep through the tribe's bones. Eli didn't ask for status. He didn't demand respect. He simply worked. He rose with the sun, helped carry water, rebuilt fallen fences, learned the medicines of bark and root from the women who once turned their backs on him. Slowly, the tribe began to shift, not by force but by presence. The kind of presence that didn't speak loudly, but never disappeared. Ayesha watched it all with the calm of someone who had seen the future before anyone else. While others had doubted, she had listened to something more ancient than any law: intuition. She knew that the land didn't need warriors who conquered, but ones who stayed. And Eli stayed. Even when he made mistakes, even when some still whispered, he faced each day with the same quiet endurance that had brought him through the canyon. Then came the storm. Not metaphor, but real, merciless thunder. 3 days of wind that tore the sky apart and sent horses running wild through the plains. A tree fell on one of the healers' huts. A riverbank collapsed near the southern trail. Panic gripped the camp, and while warriors scrambled to manage the chaos, it was Eli who rallied the children, sheltered the animals, and dug with bare hands through the mud to rescue a trapped elder. When the storm cleared and the damage was counted, the question in everyone's eyes was no longer who Eli was, but how they ever lived without him. That night, around the largest fire, Chief Makwa called for silence. He stood with his staff in one hand and a stone bowl in the other. Ayesha stood at his side. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply took Eli's hand and placed it over the bowl. The chief poured water over both their hands, mixing soil and ash between their fingers. And then, for the first time in living memory, the chief said these words: "Not chosen by war, nor blood, but by earth and storm and truth, we welcome you, not as guest, not as test, but as son." The circle widened, and Eli stepped in, not as the poor farmer, but as the man whose spirit had bent the will of a people. The seasons shifted gently, as if honoring the change. Grass grew taller. Game returned to the hills. Elders swore the river's water had never been clearer. But what truly marked the difference wasn't the land. It was the stories. Around fires and under stars, the children no longer whispered legends of distant battles or forgotten chiefs. They asked about the canyon, about the farmer, about the kiss, about the choice that changed everything. Ayesha, now more than princess, became a bridge. She taught the next generation that strength could look like a blade, or like patience, that love could heal in ways tradition could not predict. And Eli became something the tribe had no word for. Not warrior, not healer, not hunter, but a quiet flame that never flickered. He wasn't there to lead. He was there to remind. And the tribe had never needed that more. One morning, a young boy who had lost both parents asked Eli, "What made her choose you?" Eli paused, smiled, then knelt beside him. "She didn't choose who I was," he said. "She chose what I could become, and then gave me the space to become it." The boy nodded as if the answer had been hiding in his own heart all along. And from that day on, he followed Eli everywhere. Outside, tribes began to hear the tale, not just of the kiss, but of what came after, of how a people bound by lineage opened their circle to someone different, how they didn't lose strength, but gained vision. Warriors came seeking wisdom. Elders came seeking peace. The circle had once been stone, but now it breathed, and it grew. And in the heart of it, Ayasha and Eli never wore crowns, never ruled from tents or thrones. They simply walked the same path, side by side, her with the fire of vision, him with the calm of roots, and between them, a story that would outlive both of their names. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. Not all changes were welcomed beyond the border. As word of the tribe's transformation spread, some saw it as beauty. Others saw it as betrayal. A rival war chief, Wahan, whose name meant sharp sky, heard of the farmer who walked among the sacred, who had passed the canyon, who had been kissed by a princess and crowned by soil. To Wahan, it was an offense, a sign of weakness. He had spent years building alliances through fear and force. He viewed love as distraction and mercy as poison. And so, he gathered riders. And he rode for blood. The scouts warned Chief Makwa before Wahan reached the valley. Ayasha did not tremble. She stood as if she had seen this moment long ago in a dream. Eli, now stronger, wiser, and tempered like steel and fire, did not reach for weapons. He simply asked, "Do we meet them in war or in truth?" And the chief, looking upon the man he once doubted, said only, "You met the canyon. You know it must be done." So Eli prepared, not with blades, but with witnesses. When Juan arrived, he did not dismount. His warriors formed a line behind him, armored and cold-eyed. The tribe did not raise spears. They raised voices, stories. The drummers played, not for war, but for memory. Children sang the old songs, blending them with newer ones about rivers, about choice, about farmers who kissed stars and walked through stone. The valley did not roar. It breathed. Juan dismounted, furious. He called a mockery. A farmer, he spat, is not fit to stand in the place of warriors. Eli stepped forward, calm, steady. "I never asked to stand," he said, "only to serve." And then Ayasha stepped beside him, not with a weapon, but with a small stone wrapped in red sinew. The same kind she had once dropped at her father's feet. She held it out, not to Wahan, but to the earth. The message was clear. This circle would not be broken by pride. It would not bow to steel. It would rise in unity, in humility, and in truth. Juan stared long and hard at the stone in Ayasha's palm. Around him, the silence of the tribe pressed like thunder without rain. He looked at Eli, looked at Ayasha, and then looked past them, at the people, children, elders, warriors, standing not in defense, but in unity. His men waited for a command, but none came, because in that moment, Juan saw not defeat, but irrelevance. He left that valley without drawing a blade. And after that day, no army ever returned. Seasons passed again. Crops thrived. Songs grew louder. The tribe did not forget its warriors or traditions. They simply began to rewrite what strength looked like. Boys were told that fists were not the only way to defend. Girls were told that leadership did not require permission. And both were told that love, true love, was not weakness, but transformation. Eli and Ayasha became symbols, yes, but more than that, they became seeds. What they planted with a kiss grew into something that no fire could burn. Their story was etched into blankets, whispered in childbirth, sung at weddings. And every time a child found someone who saw their spirit before their scars, they were reminded, the circle is always big enough for one more. In the end, Eli never became chief. He never asked to, but his name became one of those that passed between generations, not as a legend, but as a lesson. That love, when rooted in courage, doesn't just change lives. It moves tribes. Years later, under the golden hush of twilight, a girl sat beside her grandfather at the edge of the river. She was curious, wide-eyed, restless, and full of questions. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did a princess really choose a farmer?" The old man, gray-bearded and quiet as drifting smoke, smiled without turning his head. "She didn't just choose him," he said. "She saw him, before anyone else could." The girl leaned closer. "And what happened after that?" He pointed toward the horizon, where the mountains cut the sky like sacred teeth. Everything changed. The circle grew wider. The stories grew braver. And people stopped measuring worth by name or blood. They began to measure it by how a person stood, in storms, in silence, and in love. The girl was quiet, letting the wind braid the story into her memory. It was no longer just history. It was heritage. Elsewhere, a stone marked the place where Eli and Ayesha were buried, side by side, beneath the shade of a tree that hadn't been there when they first met. No one had planted it. It had grown on its own, from the earth they healed together. The bark carried carvings, names, symbols, promises etched by couples who came from distant places to stand where they once stood. Some left beads, others feathers. All of them left changed. And in the village they helped shape, young warriors trained in both the spear and the spoken word. Leaders were chosen not by lineage, but by spirit. Children were taught to ask questions not just about battles, but about choices. And around every fire, at least once a season, someone told the story, not just of a kiss, but of what followed. Of how a single act of courage, quiet and unpolished, shifted the destiny of a people. Because in the Old West, power didn't always wear armor. Sometimes it wore calloused hands. Sometimes it walked barefoot into judgment. And sometimes it kissed with no fear of consequence, only faith in what might grow from it. The story of Ayesha and Eli didn't end with their names. It echoed beyond mountains, across generations, into places they never touched, but somehow changed. It taught that love, when woven with courage, could uproot even the deepest traditions and replant them in richer soil. That real strength wasn't found in domination or bloodlines, but in recognition. The moment one soul truly saw another, their legacy became a language of its own, not spoken with words, but through how people lived, how they honored the land, how they listened before judging, how they welcomed the stranger, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. The circle that once feared disruption had become a cradle of rebirth. And every year, when the moon rose high on the same night of the kiss, the people gathered, not to reenact, but to remember. Ayesha had once told Eli, "The tribe will change when it sees something worth becoming." He never realized she meant them. Together, they became a mirror, a reminder, proof that love could lead, guide, and even rebuild what time tried to bury. And even long after their voices were gone, their silence still held weight, a kind of holy quiet that could only come from two lives lived fully, faithfully, and without apology. Some say the necklace Eli once carried now rests at the bottom of the river again, waiting to be found by another soul who thinks they are unworthy. Others say Ayesha buried it herself, the moment the tribe no longer needed symbols to believe in love like theirs. Either way, the lesson remains. What you give freely, with heart and risk, might just become the beginning of something sacred. Because in a land carved by storms and silence, it was not war that changed a tribe. It was a kiss. It was a choice. And it was the courage to stand still and be seen. In a land once ruled by silence, where tradition walked heavier than truth, one woman dared to kiss beyond the boundaries of blood, and one man dared to answer that kiss with presence instead of pride. Ayesha and Eli did not rewrite history. They reclaimed it. Through soil, through storm, and through sacred defiance, they showed an entire people that strength is not always born from legacy. Sometimes, it's born from love that refuses to wait for permission. Their journey was not about rebellion, nor romance. It was about recognition, about seeing worth in what the world dismisses, and choosing to honor it anyway. Ayesha did not save Eli, and Eli did not change Ayesha. They chose one another, day after day, and through that choice, transformed the very soil they walked on. The tribe that once questioned now teaches. The people who once watched now remember. And that memory is not fading, it's growing. Because real courage doesn't always charge through flames or carry a banner into battle. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it plants. Sometimes it simply holds another hand and says, "You are enough as you are, and I will walk with you until the land accepts us both." And that's the kind of legacy the wind cannot erase, the kind the earth carries forward like a heartbeat underfoot. So now, if this story echoed something in you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own choices, your own place in the circle, don't let it stop here. Let it continue. Share your voice in the comments. Pass this story to someone who needs to believe they are seen. And if you want to be part of more journeys like this one, subscribe and walk with us. Your presence, like Eli's, may be the start of something no one saw coming. Because in the end, it's not the grand battles or titles that shape history. It's the moments when someone chooses to see, to stay, and to stand, even when the world tells them they don't belong. And that, in the Old West or in our hearts, is how true circles begin.